Students, here we are again, online lecture number 3. We are going to be talking about cell processes and energy. This is Mr. Schlegel speaking, and hopefully you all are excited to be here. I know I am. If you are looking to reference in your book what the heck I am talking about, photosynthesis is on page 44 to 49. Cellular respiration and fermentation can be found 50 through 55. I noticed that I put an extra S on the end of fermentation. Doesn't need to be there. In the picture to the right, I was able to take a trip to see the redwoods and found that this is something you should probably do every day to get at one with nature. Give a tree a hug. So we will talk cell processes and energy. First cell process is photosynthesis. As we know, photosynthesis happens all the time. You've heard it a lot of times before, and it only happens in plants and some weird bacteria. So animals cannot do photosynthesis. Happens in plants and weird bacteria. Comes from two words. Comes from photos, which is a Greek word that means light, and I'm not even going to try the other one. Syntheuthenia, to put together. So the word basically means to put together using light. So the question is, to put together what? That is a good question. As you can see my friend thinking there, the Greeks seem to have a lot of time to think. Photosynthesis. What it is the process by which a cell captures energy from sunlight and uses it to make food. The sun is not one of those things put together in photosynthesis, but the original energy source to all things on Earth. So in order for this put together process to happen, you need some energy to start it. And that's where the sun comes in. It gives energy for these organisms to start photosynthesis. If you try and think of something on Earth that doesn't get its energy from the sun, I would be a little suspicious of you. So I dare you, try and find something that doesn't get its energy either directly or indirectly from the sun. Now, photosynthesis has some needs in order for it to start. So what does a plant need to grow besides the sun? It needs water, carbon dioxide. Well, I guess that's it. No, really, that's it. Seriously, all it needs. Kind of mind-blowing. Another picture from my fun trip to the redwoods. I would really encourage you to go sometime. You get to see huge trees and the ocean all together. Water, carbon dioxide, and the sun. That's what photosynthesis needs. So we talked photosynthesis is putting together. So what's it putting together? And it's putting together its two needs, water and carbon dioxide. I know it's kind of mind-blowing here. That a huge redwood tree or even a maple tree in your backyard comes only from water, which is a liquid, clear liquid, and a gas in our atmosphere that you can't even see. The gas of carbon dioxide is only a little bit less than 1% of the air we're breathing. So there's not really a whole lot out there. This happens in two main stages. And now we're into probably about page 47 in your book, 47 and 48 here. The first one is capturing the energy. So this happens in the chloroplast. Obviously, only plants can do this. Filling the chloroplast is a pigment known as chlorophyll. And it's a green pigment that absorbs the sun's energy inside the chloroplast. So in order to harness that energy from the sun, you first have to get it. Some of it is absorbed by the chlorophyll, some of it just bounces off. And you may feel it as heat coming off, it may just reflect back into the atmosphere. But the chlorophyll soaks some of it up. What the sunlight does, in stage 1, it splits water, or H2O, into just H, hydrogen, and just O, oxygen. It releases the oxygen out of the leaves and uses the hydrogen then for stage 2. Moving over to stage 2, this is where it uses that energy in order to make food. So the hydrogen that came from the water and the sunlight from stage 1 combine with carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to make a simple sugar called glucose. So when the carbon dioxide comes into the plant, it breaks up also into just carbon and oxygen. All those little atoms mixing around, they are formed using energy into this glucose. And here's the chemical formula. It takes 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, 6 oxygens. That's just kind of FYI for the future. That's glucose. And that is a plant's food, is glucose. Here's the photosynthesis equation. And you'll find it on page 49 of your book. And on the left side of an equation, these things are called reactants. That means to start with, or raw materials. So we start with light energy from the sun. We have 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and then we have the arrow, which means produces or yield. So these would be the products on the right side. 1 molecule of glucose plus 6 extra molecules of oxygen, which are then released in the air, which thankfully we are able then to breathe and stay alive. So we have photosynthesis to thank for our oxygen in the atmosphere. There are 2 types of living organisms on the earth. There are autotrophs, which are producers, which are capable of using photosynthesis. So an organism that can make its own food is called an autotroph. Take a second. I want you to try to think of a couple examples of an autotroph. Okay, I'm sure you had some really good ones, some very simple ones. A blade of grass would be an autotroph, a dandelion, a cactus, a palm tree, all autotrophs. Next, we have heterotrophs, and those are also sometimes called consumers. That's an organism that cannot make its own food and must eat other organisms for energy. Can you think of some examples of these, of heterotrophs? Some heterotrophs that you might think of could be like a mushroom. It could be like a bee. It could be like a cow. It might be like a monkey. Lots of different animals. Of course, the most important one would be you. You as a human are a heterotroph. Then finally, there are some real weird ones like the Venus flytrap that kind of have both properties. They get some energy through autotrophic means, making food through photosynthesis. They get others through eating others, like when a fly lands on them and they close those nasty things and digest it. That would be a heterotrophic characteristic. At the end of photosynthesis, you are left with some sugar. Now, you have not produced any energy yet. Photosynthesis is only to make the food. Cellular respiration is to make the energy. And this would be 50 to 55. And you see it's the process by which cells obtain energy from glucose. This takes place in the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. Now maybe you're starting to understand why we spent all those days talking about the parts of the cell, because it leads into what happens in the cell. Here is a molecule of glucose, and that's a substance that's created in photosynthesis. It's also what carbohydrates are broken down into in animal cells. So you guys eat an apple, your body is going to break that down into glucose. And if you look at that, this is a big molecule. So this cannot just move through the cell membrane. This is one that would need a protein channel, facilitated diffusion. Also, it is not in a place where the mitochondria is ready to break it down, so it must be broken down by the lysosomes in the animal cells. In plant cells, they're ready to use it. Animal cells, it's got to be broken down. Cellular respiration, just like photosynthesis, happens in 2 stages, and these 2 stages can be found on page 52 of your book. Stage 1 takes place in the cytoplasm, and this is where glucose is broken down into the smaller molecules, releasing a tiny amount of energy. So this would be your lysosomes helping out in this case. Stage 2 then happens in the mitochondria. Those smaller molecules move into the mitochondria where they react with oxygen to produce a large amount of energy for the cell. They also produce carbon dioxide, which eventually the organism breathes out or gets rid of, and some extra water as well. So these things are what happen in the mitochondria. Cellular respiration equation. Now this gives off a whole bunch of energy for the organism to use. As you can see here, this starts with glucose. You add 6 oxygen molecules, and then this produces a big amount of energy, 6 carbon dioxide molecules, and 6 water molecules. Do you notice anything weird about these equations? Photosynthesis, respiration? If you kind of look back, or if you take a look in your book, the cellular respiration one is on page 52. You can see that these are opposite equations. So what's happened is the reactants from one become the products of the other, whereas the products of that one become the reactants of the first one. Put a little chart here for you. In photosynthesis, what goes in? Sunlight, water, carbon dioxide. What comes out? Glucose and oxygen. That then feeds into respiration. So the glucose and oxygen go in, and what comes out is a great deal of energy and water and carbon dioxide. If you look on there, there's really only one that is a one-way street. That would be the sunlight. Once the sunlight goes in, the system now has energy to run. These processes are called interdependent. So they're opposite equations. They're called interdependent. And that means they depend on each other. So two things depending on each other. One process uses what the other produces and vice versa. Like I said already, the sunlight's the only thing that comes from outside the system. So you can think about interdependent relationships you have in your life where you depend on somebody for something and they depend on you for something else. It could be you depend on, you depend on a pencil to fill out your assignments. A pencil depends on you to get it out of your locker and to put it next to the paper. You need each other, right? If there's not enough oxygen present to run cellular respiration, we've got a problem, right? Cellular respiration needs glucose and oxygen. If there's not enough oxygen present, so either you're working really hard running or little organisms that live places where there isn't much oxygen. There are places on Earth where there's not much, like under the ocean. A process will kick in called fermentation. And fermentation is another energy-releasing process like cellular respiration, but it does not require oxygen. That's a misprint right there. It should say an energy-releasing process that does not require oxygen. Fermentation produces far less energy and it gives off 2 waste products. So really it's best if there is oxygen, but if there's not, you can still work it. Alcohol and lactic acid are 2 waste products. Fermentation only kicks in when there's a shortage of oxygen in the cell. Some of the foods and drinks that we have actually use fermentation to get to the point where which we can eat them. Yeast raises bread. That's a alcoholic fermentation. It gives off carbon dioxide and makes those little bubble that you see in your bread, most baked goods. Also, wine and beer are made this way through fermentation. Your muscle cells in your body actually also use fermentation when they use more oxygen than can be replaced. This causes lactic acid buildup and sore muscles. So after you work really hard, your muscles might get really sore the next day. That's from this lactic acid. If your muscles can't get oxygen quick enough, they'll go into fermentation just to keep going, and that produces lactic acid. We have reached the end of online lecture number 3. Way to go, everyone. Woo-hoo! Way to go. Hope you didn't have to use too much energy to learn all this great stuff, but if you did, go ahead. Now you may take a nap if you would like. Or if you want to go outside and climb a big tall tree in honor of finishing this, you are sure welcome to. If you have questions, refer to your textbook. Also, you may ask your teacher, and they would be glad to inform you on any questions you have. Thank you so much for listening.